Hey guys, my guest tonight, Richard Lang, is going to be talking about UFOs and first responders. See you in about 5 minutes. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Hey everybody, welcome. Happy Wednesday. Hope you guys have had a good week so far, or right in the middle of this. But it's looking like it's going to be okay this week. It's looking like it's going to be okay, inching ever closer to Halloween. Busy time for my team, and I know for a lot of other paranormal teams that are out there, lots going on. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your guest. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation team based out of Sacramento, California. We're 45 strong up and down the state, which means if you have a paranormal problem or you think you might have one, we can get to you. It may take us a while. California is a huge state. People don't realize how big we are. But we will get out there within 2 to 3 days. And in the case that we have to wait to get out there, we do have mediums on staff who can phone you and talk to you about what may or may not be going on in your place of business or home. And in most cases, if there is something going on, they're able to calm it down until we can get out there. Okay? All right. That being said, if you're watching from Facebook tonight, and a lot of you are, please be sure to hit that follow button if you haven't done so already, because I'm looking for followers. And also, as you watch, be sure to hit those thumbs up and show me some love with some hearts and stuff. And also, be sure to do some chatting in the chat room, okay? Because what that does is it throws us out higher in the Facebook's FYP, meaning Facebook's computer can see that we have all this stuff going on. And so they're going to push us out to more people, all right? So if you can do that, I appreciate it. Same thing with YouTube. Works the same way. If you haven't subscribed already, be sure to do so. I've got over 800 videos over there, all different topics, not only paranormal either, because I'm a journalist, photojournalist, and I can change it up. So I'll talk about murders and spousal abuse and topics like that in general. So I like to mix it up. But the thing is, with all those videos sitting over there, you go onto that page and it'll give you a migraine. Totally confusing. So what I've done is I'm just about finished categorizing everything. So if you want to look for UFOs and whatnot, there's a folder for that. You want to look for medium Nancy Matz, there's a folder for that. So, there's folders for almost every topic under the sun. And all you have to do is click on them to go visit those pages. Excuse me 1 second. I got allergies going on today. It's something that made me break out. Anyway, welcome, and I've got a great guest today. And please subscribe if you haven't done so already on YouTube. You can find our group at Twitter under California Haunts. You can find us under Twitch under Cal Haunts. You can find us over at TikTok under California Haunts. You can find us on Facebook under California Haunts Radio, Sacramento Sears. We're really easy to find. Instagram, Ghosty Gal, all lowercase. And we're also at meetup.com under California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team. Okay, now that that's all out of the way, my guest today, Richard Lang, has done a lot of study into this UFO phenomenon. And I agree with what he says. I heard him on another show talking about this. And I do believe in the fact that our first responders really don't have a lot of training in how to handle paranormal stuff, whether it is UFO, UAP, or even ghosts. There's no training there. There's a mentality, and there's always been this mentality. I've been watching this for years as I studied Sasquatch. I've been watching this for years where the scientific community is not going to believe anything until somebody kills one and takes it in, they can dissect it. And that's a lot of the problem with our mentality in society, because that's how we feel. So as far as the UFOs go and law enforcement, that's what's going to happen. Somebody's going to get scared or whatever. They're going to shoot one of these things, bring it in for dissection if they haven't done that already. So I agree with my guest. We're going to be talking about UAPs and how law enforcement and emergency crews handle them. Okay? UAP UFOs. So let me bring them in, and we'll get the show on the road. Hi, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Happy Wednesday. I'm excited to have you on.
Thank you.
The only paranormal shows I watch, because I've been doing this for 18 years, right? The only thing that I watch is I will watch the Paranormal 911 shows with the police and fire department and the haunted hospitals, because I figure they're trained observers. And so what they see is what they see. Police officers are going to lie that he saw a disc, in the sky and stuff. So those are the shows I watch. So when I heard you on the other show talking about this particular topic, it really struck a bell with me. That there has to be more training, and I agree with you. So let's talk. Tell me about you, and then we'll segue into all that.
Thanks. Well, essentially, I've been doing this kind of research for over 30 years. I've written 3 books. Probably the most notorious thing I've done in the past few years is during the, if you all remember, 3 or 4 years ago, Washington Post, New York Times wrote articles about this secret project that was funded by the Defense Intelligence Agency. It was facilitated through Bigelow Aerospace. I was hired to manage part of that program. There were basically, my role was like chief investigator and lead project manager on the non-classified side. So essentially what we were doing was we were taking cases that were reported through MUFON. I had a team of people that would sort through them. They typically get 800 cases, new reports a month. And these guys would sort through those reports. We'd end up maybe with 50 really good ones. And then I'd deploy investigators to go out and interview the people and do the research, collect data. And then when ultimately they'd send it back to me, and I'd finalize reports that were submitted to BASS, which is Bigelow Aerospace Applied Space Studies. It's a sister company for Bigelow Aerospace. And they were basically working behind the scenes with Defense Intelligence Agency. So recently, with some of the stuff that's come out in the books, I've been told that the guys at the Pentagon every Friday were sitting there waiting for my reports to come in, and they read them. And so I've gotten, I've gotten a lot of notoriety from that work that I've done. Plus, I've been on, I think, 12 Discovery Channel shows and that kind of thing. But right now, basically, the first book I wrote was a book to train investigators how to look at paranormal phenomena. And it was called The Methodology for a New Age, UFO Investigation. That book's done really well, and it's used by a lot of the organizations to train people to be prepared for how this all unfolds. The second book I wrote was basically for the public, and that was just to go back and start in the days of the Truman administration when these things first started crashing and they were recovered. And then, that they built these secret programs with defense contractors to do the research and engineering. And there's been we know of at least 100 crashes that have been recovered over the last 50 or 60 years. And they have alien bodies and all kinds of wreckage and that they've done back engineering and research. So with that all said, for a while, I did some time in law enforcement during the post 9/11 period. I worked for Homeland Security. I was a liaison for law enforcement in the airports in Virginia. And most of the people that, are my good friends are like cops and sheriffs and stuff like that. And one of the things I can tell you is that nowhere in any of the training that's ever done for law enforcement people, like in the police academy and that kind of stuff, there's never one word about a UFO. It's just not talked about. It's not touched. And it's been that way for a long time. So essentially what's happened that's changed everything is that there's more than a dozen people that are members of Congress that are very interested in UFO activity, and particularly activity over like nuclear weapons facilities, storage areas, and missile silos, and, restricted military areas. And for the last couple of years, they've been really digging at the Pentagon, trying to figure out what's going on. And honestly, they've actually done some television interviews where, these guys, I mean, it's almost a joke, but these guys are just spinning them around, giving them ridiculous answers and not really cutting to the truth of what's going on. So last year, what happened was about 15 of these guys in Congress got together. And every year, it's called the National Defense Authorization Act. It's a bill that goes through Congress every year, and it basically allocates the money for the military and the Defense Department. And those bills are like 1,500 pages. So what these guys did is they put language in that bill that said, if anyone that works for the United States government or anyone who's a contractor for the United States government that's had any kind of hands-on contact with non-human bodies of extraterrestrial origin or any crash wreckage or vehicles of terrestrial, extraterrestrial origin, or been involved in any kind of back engineering or research involved with any of that, they basically gave them immunity and amnesty from prosecution if they come forward and talk to Congress about what they know about this. And so the language in the act specifically says that if they come forward, they cannot be constrained by their national security agreements that they sign, which would allow them to work on this stuff. And so with that all said, it was the bill went through it was in Congress, it went through the Senate, the president signed it last year, and now it's federal law. So what you're hearing on TV about the whistleblowers is actually people that are coming forward in compliance with that act and basically telling Congress what's really going on. And what happened was you had a guy named Gresh that came about 3 or 4 weeks ago and testified in open hearings in Congress that were televised. Right. And he's basically saying, look, we've got facilities all over the country where we've got non-human alien bodies. We've got wreckage that's of extraterrestrial origin, crafts of extraterrestrial origin. We've been doing back engineering and research on this stuff for 50 years. And one of the congresswomen said, well, where is this stuff? And he goes, I have a list of it. If you'd like to get in the SCIF, which is a secret compartmental, it's a classified security area. I'll give you a list of every one and what's in them. And so essentially what you've got is a number of members of Congress now have exact information about what's in these facilities and where are they and what's going on. So that's kind of what set the stage. And then, so what's happened now is, you know, they're talking about alien bodies and extraterrestrial spacecraft wreckage on the 6 o'clock news now. And when they talk about something on the 6 o'clock news, then it becomes reality for the American people. It's like you said. And so essentially what's happened now is that these guys in law enforcement are saying, hey, it's obvious this stuff is real. Our people have never been exposed to it or trained about it. And we really need to do that. So I'm working with some people in a group that we recently founded. And that's what we're trying to do is put together programs to train police. And that's where this book came from. So essentially, you know, I wrote this book for the first responders, and what it is, it's a guide to the whole picture. It starts out, you know, giving you a little bit of the history, like this has been going on since the Truman administration, 70 years, and here's what they've done, and here's where, you know, you still have me, don't you? My screen.
Yes, you're here. Yep, I can hear you. Don't worry about it.
Okay, I see it. Yeah, the book. Yeah. So basically, I put some history in there to explain what happens, what's happened, what's been going on for the last 50 years, a little bit about what the government's done in terms of trying to cover it up. Mostly, a lot of people will say to me, well, why does the government just tell us what they know and what's going on? Well, part of the problem is the government doesn't have, you know, this stuff isn't laying around in military bases somewhere. It's in the private facilities that are owned by the defense contractors.
Right.
And even when I worked on the project with Bass at Bigelow Aerospace, they had an underground secured facility there. And last year they responded to a Freedom of Information Act request, and the Pentagon blatantly come out and said, yes, that they had extraterrestrial spacecraft wreckage in that facility that they were doing research on. So I didn't know that at the time, you know. I mean, I would probably in there begging on my knees to work on that part of the project, but since then I've learned that was so, and basically all of that stuff is proprietary, and that's what's happened all over the country. All these corporations that do this research, they have this stuff in their facilities. They've done back engineering and research for 50 or 60 years. They've made billions with a B, billions of dollars on the technology they've developed. And they pretty much try to keep the government out of it as much as possible. You know, back in the Eisenhower days, by the time Eisenhower left office, he was really upset because they weren't coming clean with what they were doing. And when he left office, he said, beware of the military industrial complex because of the misplaced power. And that's what he was talking about, is that they had given them all this material, and there was all kinds of tax money dumped into these black operations, tax money dumped into these projects. And then when it came time for Eisenhower to find out what's going on, they were telling him, well, you don't have a high enough security clearance. Sorry, pal.
Wow.
And that didn't go over well with him. And from what we know, we actually there's some pretty strong evidence indicating, I talked about it in my book a little bit, but basically he had wanted to know what was going on in Area 51, the Groom Lake S4 area out there, and that's what they said. He didn't have security clearance, and basically he let them know that, you know, I want this information. I want on my desk by a week from next Friday, and if I don't have it, I'm coming to California. I'm coming to Colorado. I'm going to take control of the 1st Cavalry. I'm going to come in there and tear that place apart. It's your choice. And they probably believed him because he just won World War II, you know.
Right.
And so they did apparently give him a lot of information that he wanted to know about, but he was very disturbed about it because he didn't like the fact that they were going behind his back and the members of Congress and not really telling him what they were doing. So I sort of try to touch that in my book, because people try to say to me, well, what's the big deal about the secrecy? Well, can't the public handle it? Well, it's actually not about that. It's more about the money these guys are making. And they're not ready to hand it over and give it up yet. And that's a big part of it. And there's also the what we call high strangeness, because clearly when you do this research, I've been doing it for a long time, there's a lot of things that occur that don't fit with our laws of physics the way we see them. You know, in terms of like multidimensional existences and you know, where they can manipulate time. And you know, for the average person, that's kind of it's a little hard to wrap your mind around it when you first start dealing with it. And in my first book, part of the thing that I try to do is, when you're training investigators, a lot of times they'll write a report up based on their own perception of reality. And so an example would be car sitting on the ground somewhere. And the observers in the car, the witnesses say that this craft, a saucer craft, came and went right down through the trees. It's called a transmedium vehicle, where it can trans through solid objects. And then it went through a steel chain link fence and landed next to the car. That's what happened. So the investigator goes out and, you know, interviews everybody. And then when he or she writes the case up, they say, the craft flew over the trees, flew over the fence, and landed next to the car, because in their mind, it's impossible to go through a steel fence.
Sure.
And so what you have is, you have a database that's pretty corrupt, because they haven't really reported what's happened. They've reported what they thought happened based on their own perception. So a lot of the work that I'm doing is trying to train them, hey, you know, here's what a transmedium vehicle means, you know, and look at density. If you have, you know, if you can change the frequency and go into a higher dimensional existence, the density gets lower, and that allows them to go through solid objects, and teaching people what really happens. And so there's a shift there where their perception of reality has to change too. And so they can accurately report this stuff. So with all that being said, now I'm writing a book about for cops, for police. And I've served in law enforcement both on the federal and state level, and has indicated that nobody's ever said a word about a UFO. And so in the book, I try to give them some background about how this all evolved, and then talking about some of the projects that have been done and how they handle this information. But the part of the book is there's a section in the book that gives you a detailed list of things. If someone came to you and reported something, these are the kind of questions you want to ask, you know, like as far as the altitude and the, you know, how did it move and how did it, you know, travel, and all. There's 3 or 4 pages of questions that you'd want to kind of familiarize yourself with. But then the other thing is, in looking at how this all works, okay, basically what the government's done is they'll be the ones to do the recovery operation. So what they have is, they're called reconnaissance units or recon teams. The first one was set up in Fort Belvoir in Virginia. And basically they had a team of people that would go out and recover this stuff. Now understand, the reconnaissance teams aren't exclusively working on UFOs, because there's all kinds of things that happen. A military aircraft comes down somewhere with a nuclear weapon on board or a missile on board. or there's a train wreck that's transporting nuclear material. There's all kinds of things that occur where these recon units are very specially trained to go out, take control of it, and analyze it, and then pack it up and remove it and clean the area up and all that kind of stuff. So I think a lot of police, and what I'm trying to say is, when they do this kind of thing, you've got a team of very highly skilled military operations type people. Some of them are contractors and some of them are enlisted military, but they have a team of people that can go to these unit areas very quickly. On one occasion in my book, I'm not going to say how I got the pictures, but I took pictures of a recon unit that was a caravan of about 16 or 18 vehicles. And some of the vehicles, I've got pictures in my book, and they're pretty weird looking. They've got all kinds, they all have police lights on them, but they're military vehicles, and they've got all kinds of very sophisticated antennas and equipment on the roof of them and all that kind of stuff. So with that said, you've got, like Belvoir in Virginia, you've got Nellis Air Force Base, and probably half a dozen other places around the country where these guys operate out of. And so when an event like this occurs, and see, a lot of people don't understand that you've got NORAD, and NORAD basically surveys the area above the earth in the United States and Canada. And so anything that flies into the airspace above the United States, they know about it and they're monitoring it. Or anything that materializes in the airspace, they know about it and they're monitoring. That's why so often in these reports, you'll see people that'll say that, the UFO was scooting along, and there was a black helicopter or a fighter jet chasing it or around it. And that's because they know, and they're after this stuff, right? And they're on it right now. So if you're a local cop somewhere and something happens in your county, the recon unit's probably going to know about it and be there before you do. But you may be getting reports of some strange things that are happening. But what's going to happen is the recon unit's going to respond. And that's going to be a team of people that are highly skilled, the nuclear, chemical, biological, and they'll probably have somebody there that can communicate telepathically. And they're going to go into where this wreckage is, and they're going to ask the local police to set up a perimeter. And so if there's people that living there, they're going to evacuate them, and the police will probably be a part of that. So the police, the average sheriff or police department, they're going to be regarded in the respect that they're going to be asked to maintain a perimeter. And so what'll happen, they'll put a story out on the media that's, there was a train wreck with toxic chemicals on it, or some kind of a hazardous event that occurred in this area to scare people away. And then they'll go in and begin to set up their operation and testing. So usually the first thing they'll do, they'll come in and they'll set up lighting, and then they'll use instruments to radiological and electromagnetic fields, the hazards that might be available there or there, and then deal with occupants if they're deceased or not. And once they complete they're going to do like an analysis or evaluation of everything and categorize everything. And once they do that, then the next step would be to make arrangements to transport it to some holding facility. And usually they use, like flatbed tractor trailer trucks and trailer trucks to do that. And again, the local police are going to maintain the perimeter and until that's done. And then once they get the wreckage out of there, they'll clean it up and remove any hazardous waste or whatever's there that when they're done, you probably would never know that something crashed there. And so, the local police departments, I want to make sure they understand how that all falls together. And probably some of them would say, okay, that all makes sense, and then I think that was probably the most important part of the book for a law enforcement person, is to really understand the whole concept of it. But then the next thing the next chapter that I wrote was based on a lot of the work we've done with investigators over many years. And what it is, it's a section on basically what to do and not to do if you're ever involved in something where you might roll up on something that just crashed, if you got there. And a lot of that has to do with personal safety. When you in any kind of event, even if a satellite comes down somewhere, a piece of it, they use little miniature nuclear reactors and satellites to power them. So that wreckage is radioactive and obviously very dangerous. So, you know, one of the things that I've said was, and based on many reports that I've read about people that have had close encounters, if you can, stay in the car, because the metal in the car protects you from a lot of the electromagnetic fields and radiation that might be there. And, you know, and the way I came to that conclusion is over the years, you look at reports where people had encounters, you know, and one guy hops out of the car and the other guy's cowering under, you know, all rolled up in the back seat, scared. And the guy that jumped out of the car ends up with all kinds of radiation sickness and burns and tumors, and the other guy that stayed in the car didn't have any ill health effects. So that's what to consider. If you have if you have a craft that's hovering, okay. And I wrote a little bit. This book is the first book I've written about propulsion and how it works. But basically, these things use a type of propulsion. It's called electrogravitic. And what it is if you have a craft, either a saucer or a triangle, and it's hovering close to the ground, you do not want to get underneath that, because walking underneath that would be like sticking your arm in a microwave oven, if that makes sense.
Right.
Because that's the kind of tissue damage that would happen if you got close to that, because it's very similar to microwave in the way it'll affect skin tissue. And so obviously you don't want to walk underneath one. And if you have one of these crafts that's on the ground and it's still powered up, the metallic surface of it sometimes will emit like an ultraviolet radiation, and it would like give you like a sunburn kind of thing. And then some of them have been known to emit radiation in the X-ray spectrum. And it's strong enough to cause radiation sickness. So, you know, you don't want to be hopping out of the car and running over there and getting too close and touching it, because it obviously might have some serious health hazards for you. And then a lot of little things, like you don't point like high-powered lights at them if they're hovering. There are tons of cases out there where people had encounters and they saw something, you know, up, you know, a triangle, or it's up maybe a few hundred feet, 1,000 feet above them, and they run in and they grab their million candle power spotlight they use for spotting deer, and as soon as they point that up at the craft, nothing good ever happens after that. You know, people have had various things have occurred, including like being burned by beams of light and stuff like that they put back down. So, you know, don't point any kind of high, you know, nowadays with the cops, and, you know, I have a couple of them, that these little flashlights are like really powerful. They're 100 times brighter than your car headlights. And you don't want to point that up, because they're like, oh, what is that? You know, I'm trying to see what it looks like better. When you point that light at them, that could cause a hostile response. And, you know, just little things like that. And even when you know, one of the things you want to consider is that these beings have technology that's like 1,000 years ahead of us. And I'm serious about that. And so, you know, I said, like, if you're a cop and you get out of the car, you've got what we call a duty belt. You've got a gun in a holster on that duty belt. And you want to leave your gun in that holster. You do not want to pull your gun out, because that would be taken as a furtive move or a threat that someone inside may feel. And so you know, going to guns with them is like a huge mistake. The other thing is if you do encounter something where there's crash and injuries, that you want to, I mean, it sounds a little weird, but you want to have a mindset of feeling compassion and like, I'm here to help, and I'm sorry this happened to you. That's what you want to be thinking about if you get around them, because they can clearly hear your thoughts. And, you know, if you're thinking, well, the first thing that's moving, I'm going to shoot it, that's probably not going to go well for you. So, you know, there's a whole list of things like that in the book that I've talked about to try to prepare people that might actually, you know, be involved in an encounter. Most of the investigators, typically they would not be on site when it was going down. Most of the time, the investigators, someone, you know, someone will file a report, and the investigator will follow up and go out and interview them. It's typically not, you know, in the real time when it's actually happening. Where the cops, on the other hand, they may roll up on something that's unfolding right now. You know, they pull up and there's people out there going, man, and you won't believe what just happened to me, you know, and I think a lot of times part of the book that I wrote, there's a group called UAP Med, and they've got people that they're trying to put together, psychologists and medical people, to help abductees and people who've had close encounters. And part of what I was trying to get across in my book is this stuff really happens. And if you encounter someone that's telling you about this stuff that's happening, they're not crazy and they're not insane, but they've just had the hell scared out of them.
Sure.
You know, and to hopefully that they'll be treated more compassionately. Because I think 10 years ago, somebody said, hey, I was just abducted and I went in this flying saucer and these guys put all these probes in me, and they'd be like, okay, call the Section 8, we'll send him down for the psych unit and put him there overnight, you know. And you still may do that, but at least have some understanding that what they're telling you happened might really have happened. What might make it easier for everybody involved. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's kind of, you know, what I did. And then the last part of my book, there was a chapter in there that I included from the other book. And basically what it is the what we're dealing with right now is what we call disclosure. And essentially what that means is at some point the government or some of these corporations are going to come clean and say, yes, here's what we have, here's the bodies, here's the wreckies, that kind of thing. So that's a point we call disclosure. And I think we're getting closer and closer to that all the time, particularly with all the whistleblower action that's going on and that kind of thing. So when you're dealing with that, there's what I've listed 6 things that I think are going to be really hard in order that have to be dealt with before you can go full disclosure. And first of all, the 6 things in there, there's a lot of people out there, including some insiders, that will tell you they think that because the defense contractors are going to want to hang on to this as long as they can, they may create some kind of like a false flag event to scare everybody and think, oh, these aliens are attacking us. And then, of course, their whole purpose is to go to Congress and drain the tax coffers to get all the money to build all kinds of new weapons to fight the aliens, which is kind of ridiculous considering that, you know, they're 1,000 years ahead of us. But there's people that think that might happen, you know, and there was a time when I sort of thought that might happen. I'm not so sure they get away with all the stuff that's going on with disclosure now in the whistleblowers. I don't know if they get away with that one anymore. But then there are other considerations. Like one of the things that I did was I was talking about if anyone has ever heard of the Greenbrier Hotel, it's in West Virginia, and it's a really, really extraordinary, wonderful, big, as nice as it gets hotel. And what happened is during the Eisenhower administration, they built a bunker underneath the hotel that was built to house 300 members of Congress indefinitely. Okay. And the way they did it was that the money for it was funneled through the railroad company that serviced that area up there. So they were kind of laundering the money and to keep it secret. So what they did is they built a wing on the hotel, and then underneath the wing, they built this bunker. And it's pretty extraordinary. And it was built to hold 300 people from Congress. And there's a train line that runs from Washington up to Greenbrier, of course. And they were on standby readiness for like 30 years. And then what happened was about 8 years ago, the Washington Post wrote an article about the bunker. and the government declassified it because they basically blew their cover. And now you can go to the Greenbrier, and I think it's $40 and they'll give you a tour of it. It's really there. But what happened after it was declassified, they had all these legal problems and lawsuits that were coming up because this was like some of the prime real estate in the country and nobody paid any property tax on it for 30 years, that kind of thing.
Wow.
So there were all these lawsuits and tax liens and filed against people that were involved in it because of how it went down. And I sort of use that as an example because I think a lot of these defense contractors, if they have to come clean with this, they're going to be facing the same kind of consequences. People are going to go after them because, well, why didn't you pay the tax on this? And why'd you do that? And why did you take this money from Congress and then not make it available for public good? And, they know they're going to get hammered pretty good when this comes out. So I think that's a thing that part of the reason why they're trying to do it slow, disclosure in steps and slow. And part of that's so that those guys can cash in their patent rights and get the hell out of town before the public figures out what they did. But that's a possibility, hopefully. I mean, I've been saying that for a long time and I'm still here. So I guess I'm getting away with it, but it's true. And then the other things, one of the most, I put a thing in my book about Orson Welles. He did this show, it was on Halloween, I think it was 1939. And I put it in the book. And basically what they did is it was a Halloween show, and it's a radio show, a CBS radio show in New York. And so what they did is they just were playing around with it, and they said, oh, basically they were saying that the Martians had landed in New York, and then they come back, they continue the radio show. Oh, another bulletin. Now it's in Cleveland, and now all over the world, all of the United States, the military is hopelessly trying to fight them, and they're taking over, blah, 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 and they did a really good job and really scared people bad. And the research I did, the police came to the studio and they were trying to stop it because their switchboards were blowing up. People are like calling, and there's all this panic, and all these people jump in their cars and they're trying to get out of New York, and they're driving up the wrong side of the freeways, and it just they went nuts. And it sort of shows you how the impact of something like that could have on disclosing it. So it's got to be done slowly and carefully, and and not to so the public has some time to deal with it. And then the other things that are really in the forefront of this is the whole concept of comes into play as consciousness, and how human consciousness and how that will affect it. And also you have to talk about, one of the things that I tried to write about is in France and in Switzerland, there's this particle accelerator that's underground. It's like an 8-mile loop. And in there, they're using that to explore the mysteries of the universe. And they will tell you, they did a 60-minute show about 8 years ago, and they said, we've already identified 12 dimensional existences outside this time-space reality. And so these are quantum physicists telling you, yeah, this is for real. And so when they say that, a lot of the research that we've done would indicate that these things can move in and out of our dimensional reality. I mean, it's just that simple. And I tried to describe it a little bit. A lot of it has to do with frequency. And it's kind of like a simple way to understand it is if you look and like, say you're watching a television show. And so you turn this channel selector to a certain channel on a certain frequency, you watch that show. And then you can change the channel to a different frequency, and there's a different show on there. Both of those shows exist simultaneously. It's just that you can only experience the one that you're tuned into that frequency of. And the same kind of concept works with dimensions. The reason why we can communicate is we're both resonating at the same frequency. And if we could change our frequency to a higher frequency, we could go into another dimension. And apparently these ETs have figured out a way to do that. And so on our side of the mirror, it's really confusing because airline pilots, something will be right there in front of their plane and bam, it's gone, disappears. And then a couple minutes later, it appears 5 miles over that way.
Right.
In the culmination of hundreds of these reports where people describe this thing makes it, if one person told you that, you'd be like, maybe. But when you read 100 reports and they all say that basically the same thing happened to them, and they're credible people like airline pilots and military pilots and that kind of thing. So there's an incredible amount going on right now that the public doesn't really even have a clue about, and I think that, with particularly with police, I really think, some of the guys I'm working with, it's like really time to make sure people are trained so they at least understand this stuff. And the other thing too is if we come to a point where we have disclosure and there's evidence there, I mean, I'm pretty sure that we're in contact with a couple of extraterrestrial races right now. And when that happens, that's going to have a dramatic effect on human consciousness. And a lot of us, I mean, not to get political, but a lot of people, there's a small handful of people controlling everybody. They say the wealth of the United States is held by less than 100 people. And, when the rest of us wake up and realize what's really going on, they're probably not going to be able to get away with that anymore. And I think that, some kind of contact with an extraterrestrial society would expand our consciousness and certainly make us much more aware of what's going on and probably a lot less tolerant of it, which would hopefully be so, I think that if you look at, in the writing about the history of this one of the things that I think I'm pretty sure about is people say, well, what do they want with us? What are they here for? Are they here to hurt us or something? I'm like, you're kidding me. Like if they've been coming here for 1,000 years and they've got technology that's 100 years ahead of anything we've got, if they wanted to hurt us, we'd be gone already. I mean, that's the reality of it. I think that when we look at this stuff, the biggest thing that stands out to me is that they seem to be very concerned about nuclear weapons. And you saw that in the Truman administration when they started doing the nuclear testing. And then also, then they destroyed 2 cities in Japan with nuclear weapons. There was a lot more activity about of UFO activity in general. And I think some of that, combine that with the fact that we were using during the World War II era, we're using this radar that was used for anti-aircraft purposes, somewhat like it would happen at Pearl Harbor. And that anti-aircraft radar apparently interferes with their propulsion systems, which caused some of the crashes, I'm sure. So they were able to get a hold of this stuff and recover it. But the point is that the concern about the nuclear weapons is the part that I think is what keeps them coming back here. And there was a number of cases where people that work in military circles worked in these missile silo facilities, and there literally would be like a craft would come over there and just shut the whole place down. That's happened more than once, more than 5 or 10 times. And so I guess maybe that's their way of letting us know that, if we decide you're not going to use these, you're not going to use them. And, I really think that that may be a part of their agenda, is to eradicate the nuclear weapons on this planet. And most of the people in my world are like that. I think that's a pretty good idea. As long as they take them away from everybody, we're good, And, the concern that they might be trying to that they're more concerned about us destroying this planet, I think, than anything.
Right.
And so that's, and I almost feel a little weird saying this, but there's when we talk about different, like I've interviewed a lot of people that have had first contact, and I think you learn a little bit about what ETs are up to and what they're thinking by what they tell these people and the people tell you. And for the most part, in my world, it's been pretty, they think they're benevolent and they're concerned about us, the violence and the destruction of the planet and the wars, all the wars that we have going on. And I think most of us would be happy to see some of that change too.
Right.
So the quantum physicists will tell you that when you detonate a nuclear device, the effect of that, the energy from that transcends outside this time-space reality we live in, and it goes into other dimensions, and it's potentially dangerous to the galactic community, whoever they may be. And I really think that's a part of it, if that makes sense.
What do you think about educating police officers and stuff? You think that there's going to be resistance to that at all? Because people are set in their ways and how they want to do things.
Well, sure. Anytime you do anything like that, you've got resistance. But, I was talking to one of the sheriffs, and I just had went to visit him because I had worked with him in the past, and I moved into this area, and one of the other sheriffs that was my friend, he said, "You stop and see him and say hello, tell him you live there now," and I did. And of course, he's asked me what I do, and I told him I write books about UFOs, and he was like really interested. He says, "Oh, I've watched all these Discovery shows, and what do you think about this?" And I've read all these books about it. He's a person that's very interested in that. And he actually said that something landed up in the forest one night, and they didn't know what to do about it, and that's really what got me thinking about this book. And I thought, you know what, I need to write this book about this and start sending it out to some of these guys. And so that's sort of how it evolved. But yeah, there's going to be resistance, and it's like anything else. In the books, I've said that a lot of people, part of the reason it's resisting is first of all, some people think it conflicts with their religious convictions, whatever that might be.
Right.
And they it bothers them that way. Some of it just creeps them out. It scares the hell out of them. They just don't want to talk about it. It's like, I'm in my little world and everything's fine. And, I go to Sunday school, and, I don't want to hear it. And so you're going to have, in law enforcement, you've got a variety of different people, and some of them are going to feel that way. And, they're still entitled to feel that way.
Right.
But I think just making it available, you might be thinking that, and you roll up on something some night, and then your perception might change real fast too, And also, not only that, but if you did roll up on something like this and you'd never had any of this training, it might really rock you and scare you bad. But at least if you've read my book, you'll at least understand this stuff really does happen, and it's not like you've lost your mind and then you've just like freaked out or something. It's really stuff that does happen, if that makes sense.
It does. When you think of disclosure, like you said, they're doing it slowly because they don't want to freak people out. But do you think, after all this history of the crashes and everything, do you think that they're already living among us, like the hybrids?
Yeah.
It could be. It could be
part of it is when you look at this stuff. You've got, in the book, I showed you 5 or 6 pictures of different types of vehicles. You've got saucers, you've got triangles, you've got cylinders, you've got balls of light. They call them orbs, but they're balls of light. And by the same token, you have different bodies. The most of the bodies, the entities are humanoid. And by humanoid, that means that you have 2 feet, 2 legs, 2 arms, 2 eyes, 2 ears, a head, and you walk upright like we do. Some of those entities look exactly like us. People say they look more Nordic. They're blonde hair, blue eyed. If you went into a coffee shop, you could be sitting next to one you'd never know. They'd know because they could hear what you're thinking. But you wouldn't see any. They look and talk just like us. Then there's some very common, or what they call the little gray guys. They're like 3 or 4 feet tall. They've got big heads and big eyes and all that. Very common. And then some of the entities are more reptilian looking, kind of scary looking. And so yeah, there's different body types, and I think there's different agendas. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, because my main thing was that once they do come to full disclosure on this, I mean, it could be your neighbor across the street, you don't know it. So he's going to come out and say, hey, now that we have this disclosure, I'm from such and such. And that way it won't scare people as much.
Well, and another thought too would be that you've got certain people that have, trying to see how to explain this. They're born human, and they live human lives, but they also have a consciousness concept that's connected to them too somehow.
Sure.
And a lot of times what'll happen is when someone's abducted or someone has a really close encounter, first encounter, what'll happen is that they'll sometimes have like they'll be able to heal people, and they'll have psychic abilities and stuff like that.
It brings that out as well for, like you say, for abductees as well. Because I've known people that have claimed to be abducted and didn't have psychic ability. Well, didn't use their psychic abilities because, in my line of work, we believe everybody's born with them and then they get suppressed over the years. So these abductions, when they take them, because these things are communicating via the mind, when they come off these ships, they have psychic abilities. I mean, really strong now. Because
and cognitive abilities where they can see things that are coming and that kind of,
yeah. Where they open that up. One thing I remember, going back and you talking about how this has been going on through different presidents, it goes way back. When I was a kid, I'm not going to say how old I am, in the 70s, I believe it was Argosy magazine. And I remember this because my dad was into this stuff. And there were alien autopsy photos in that magazine. And I remember seeing them. And you can't, to save my life, I can't find the article online or nothing anywhere reference to it. But it was there, and I remember seeing it.
Well, there's a lot of that kind of stuff that's out there if you know where to look for it. And and of course, a lot of it is, no matter what kind of picture you come up with, somebody will say, "Oh, it's a phony," and a lot of that is because the government has spent a lot of time and money trying to keep this quiet. I'd say probably the CIA is the biggest player in that. And so, Project Blue Book, those were basically a lot of people that were connected to the CIA, and they would go out and, there were countless stories when I first started doing this, we were, can you hear that background noise? Is that okay? Good.
Oh, it's fine. It's not a problem.
There's something going on out in the hall, but as long as you can't hear it, we're fine.
It's all good.
Well, where was I? What was I getting ready to say?
I lost my track too.
Those photos and that kind of thing, they're out there.
Right.
And there's a lot of work that's being done by government agencies to kind of cover that up. And I think what we're all seeing is that that there's something's happened that reversed that, because now all of a sudden they're a lot of these guys that used to be messing with people like me are now telling you stuff that's going on. So there's definitely a change in and I don't completely understand it, but I think there's definitely a change in the focus for the government, because since that article came out 4 years ago, there's been all kinds of videos that have been shared. You saw the famous ones with Fraser and the guys that launched off the Nimitz, and they were chasing the Tic Tacs around and that kind of thing. Those videos are real, and because I was involved with one of the other pilots, and I know that is real. That stuff is real. And by the way, those aren't photographs or videos. Those are flares. They're infrared forwarding images. It's like an infrared picture. It's an infrared camera. And part of the reason they use them is because an infrared camera can see all the heat. So if you had a jet going across, you'd see a heat signature from the exhaust that's hot. And of course, none of those had any kind of components like that to them. They're just zipping around. And so, that's pretty much what you're dealing with, is a lot of it's coming out now. And I'm not sure. I think there's more going on than we probably realize. But the fact that they've got these whistleblowers on TV, you can say what you want, but there aren't any accidents like that. When somebody gets on TV like that, they're letting them do it. Because if they didn't really want him doing that, something bad would have happened to him the day before he came to Washington. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree with you in that. I think the government, for what it's worth, is doing the right thing by letting it out slowly. Because, like you say, like otherwise you'll have an effect like, for instance, the War of the Worlds. I mean, you're going to have that kind of effect if you let the stuff out too soon. So they're gradually they're gradually putting that out in front of people. So it's almost like a same day thing. You know what I mean? Like pretty soon, it's just going to be a normal thing. Oh yeah, there's aliens and there's this going on. When it does fully happen. The other thing I was thinking is, I remember one of my favorite books is the Mojave incident, when that couple was kidnapped, out of the back of their camper, and what happened afterwards, because it made me question what I do as a ghost hunter, the way they described it, because when the aliens would come, and this is where you get into that dimensional shifting, they said that the room would get cold, and they would see these aliens coming out of the walls, just like we see ghosts, just like my paranormal team does ghosts. Then it made me wonder, because when we get our EVPs and stuff, some of those sound like they're either mechanical or they're really, really, really far away. And so it makes me wonder if we're not contacting aliens sometimes when we're doing that work.
Well, I've got a couple of thoughts on that. One is a few years ago, I got invited to speak at the National Paranormal Coalition, and it was really cool. There was a bunch of people there. There was people from the Monroe Institute, the psychic research place, and there was people that were really good ghost hunters and stuff like that. Eben Alexander was there. I got to meet him and spend some time with him. And so I think one of the things that, after that I did some I talked to some of the shows more like yours. And there's clearly some similarities between some of the phenomena that happens with ghosts and with ETs. And so, I sometimes wonder if some of the stuff that was recorded back 100 years ago that they thought it was a ghost, it might have been an ET. It might have been something like that. Clearly, what you said about often when someone says they're abducted, in the first 5 or 10 times you hear this, you think this can't be happening, but I've heard it so many times, I'm sure it does happen. But basically, when someone says they're being abducted, very often they'll tell you that they're kind of taken up out of their bed and then they just go right through a wall or go through the ceiling. Okay. And so what I think, or what we think happens, is what they do is when they get connected to that person, they raise their vibrational level to a much higher frequency where the density is lower. And that makes it possible to go through the wall, if you want to think about it like that.
Absolutely.
Now, there was a case that one of the researchers shared this with me recently, but basically there was this guy, a teenager, who was abducted. And he had been, as you know, people that are abducted, it sometimes happens more than once. Might follow them through their whole family history or life. But this guy was abducted, and he was going up out of his bed, and he had a hold of a sheet from the bed. And they took him right through the window. And once he had gotten through the window, he let go of the sheet. And when he let go of it, it went back to the original time-space reality. Okay. So when the investigators get there, the sheet is embedded in the window.
Wow.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
it's molecularly in the window. In other words, the sheet goes right through the glass, and the glass and the sheet are embedded together.
Interesting.
That's very interesting. But that tells you that it's a dimensional thing, because probably when you let go of the sheet transformed back to the original time-space reality where he was still in the other. As long as he was holding on to it, it was going through. But when it got halfway through the window, he let go of it, and it like molded her into the window, into the glass and the wood in the window.
Well, that goes back to, we've been playing with that kind of thing for a long time. trying to figure that out. I mean, that Navy ship, where all those guys disappeared, and then when they came out of it, some of it were stuck. Some of them were stuck in the bulkheads.
Yeah, they were.
In the
I mean, I can't imagine how they dealt with that, but that had to be pretty awful.
Yeah, the Philadelphia State. Yeah. So I mean, I find this all fascinating because somewhere, and you got to think about this too. Somewhere we're getting the technology from somewhere to be able to do that stuff. So there has to be an agreement in place somewhere as well with these aliens for us to get this technology.
Well, and what you were saying about one of the things that that I've learned since I worked with Bass is that initially, my first book, when I wrote it, it's pretty good soup to nuts as far as how to investigate a case and report it and all that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But what we didn't talk about is that there's a lot of paranormal activity that occurs to people after they've been exposed to something like this.
Right.
In other words, if you've had a close encounter or something like that, the after effect, people start seeing like poltergeist activity in their house or shadow figures, and all that kind of paranormal thing going on. Mm-hmm. Wine bottle flying across the room and smashing against the wall and stuff like that, or voices that are discarnate. Voices, you can hear voices, but they're not coming from a body or something. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so when I'm my first book, I'm either going to revise it or write another book, a guide. And a lot more of the paranormal stuff is going to be included in that. Like what made me think of that is when you said the temperature. Mm-hmm. Anytime you have something like that, I'm sure you've experienced it more than me. Maybe offline we could talk about that. But when something like this occurs, the temperature drops.
Right.
And there's instruments you can use that'll like look forward and it'll show you, if there's a screen. And there's a place right here where the temperature's 20 degrees colder than the rest of it, that kind of thing. And so those I want to feature some of that instrumentation in my next book. And of course the EMF meters, the electronic, the different electronic fields, mm-hmm. and also radiate. Although we don't get much, at least I wouldn't think in paranormal work, you don't run into much nuclear radiation type stuff. It's
not very often. No, it's
electromagnetic and temperature.
Lots of EMF, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And also sound. There's sounds that you can record.
Yes.
In some of those ghost hunters one of the guys I met, and never forget, he had they have a tape recording. I don't know if you guys have ever used them, where you've got an earpiece and it's got a little tape recorder and it records it, but it plays back what it recorded 5 seconds later to you. There's a time lag in it. And mm-hmm. somehow he could hear stuff going on, and like you go to a battlefield and hear him talking and stuff like that. It was really interesting.
It is really interesting. What would you like to see happen with disclosure? Would you prefer it take longer, or would you prefer it be quicker?
I prefer it to be honest.
Okay.
Whatever that means, how that works.
Mm-hmm.
Something like this, when you start talking about it, it's like when you open that can of worms, you can't put it back again. You know what I'm saying? And it is, as long as whatever they do, as long as it's honest, it's not deceptive, and mm-hmm. more along the way. One of the ways that they've concealed this or tried to hide it is what they call disinformation, and they'll give you a little bit of truth mixed up with a whole bunch of BS to confuse everybody. Mm-hmm. And they've gotten very highly skilled at it. So I'm not sure how the time frame. I know it's going to happen soon, mm-hmm. and once you start it, it's going to happen. It's a snowball, and then you're not going to. It's like, what do they say when you have a car and it's on the top of the hill, mm-hmm. And it starts to drift backwards. If you get out and you stand against it and you can hold it, stop it. But if you wait till it's going 45 miles an hour down the hill, you ain't going to stop it anymore. And that's what this is all about. It's going to start coming, and when it does, it's going to open up. And I just hope that whatever's done is done honestly. Mm-hmm. That,
Do you think that cases of sightings are increasing now because people are more acclimated, because of these government reports that people aren't as afraid to go out mm-hmm. and say, hey, this happened to me, or do you just think
No,
there's an increase in general from these aliens coming because we're using all this nuclear stuff?
no, it's when we were running the Star Team Impact Project with Bass,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I did is I had a guy get a USA map and put little
Mm-hmm.
pinpoints where all the cases were,
Mm-hmm.
because we were trying to see, are there some areas where there's more cases than other areas? And essentially what we found was, like, highly populated areas, or like if you're out in Arizona and you go, I think it's Route 10 that goes up through Arizona, you'll see
Mm-hmm.
lots of reports along there. But then
Mm-hmm.
out in the Samoan desert where there isn't anybody, you don't see any reports. That doesn't mean that it's not happening there. That just means
Right.
there's nobody there to see it and experience it and report it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the consistency, I think, is first of all, it's global. It happens all over the world. Last night I was sitting there watching something from Mexico, and they were showing all the things that's happened in Mexico, and the government there isn't quite as tight as ours is, so they're a lot easier going as far as letting them put stuff on TV about sightings and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But there are what they call flaps, and a flap is like, there's been different places. One of them was in Wytheville, Virginia, and basically all of a sudden, all these people in the community start seeing all these UFOs, and it happens over a month or two, and then it quits, and nobody can figure out why or what was going on, but like thousands of people saw them. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
in the book, there's a wedding, and there's like 200 or 300 people at this venue at a wedding, and this thing hovers over the parking lot, and like 200 people come out and look at it, and that kind of thing. It's pretty irrefutable. But yeah, there are flaps. A lot of activity around military stuff, but I don't think it's it can happen. There's cases I read where people are up in New York and they're sitting on the balcony of a restaurant and they see a triangle come right over, and then out in the middle of nowhere in Georgia, somebody sees, it doesn't. I don't really think there's any correlation to a time. Now there are places, like if you the TV show about the Skinwalker Ranch, and
Sure.
of course that Bigelow owned the Skinwalker
Right.
Ranch when I was
Exactly.
working for them there. I've never been there, but I know it's a really creepy place. That most of the people that did go there weren't that, that it wasn't that much fun there.
Mm-hmm.
But there's clearly something there that's
Mm-hmm.
hooked to that geographic location where it happens,
Mm-hmm.
and there are places like that around the world where that kind of stuff does happen. That being one of the most interesting ones, probably, and the most well investigated one too. So, well,
ley lines come into play in this too, and people don't realize it. With the paranormal activity, I don't know if it works that way for UAPs or UFOs, but I mean, paranormal activity and ley lines, that's a big deal.
Well, it does, and of course, everybody talks about in Sedona the energy fields there.
Right.
One of the biggest ones in the world's in Charlottesville, and of course, I live there, and it's very close to Monticello. I live 5 miles away from it, so I wrote 2 of my books while I was in that, whatever the hell it is.
Mm-hmm.
And they say there's more writers in Charlottesville than anywhere in the country, so maybe there's something to that. I don't know, creative kind of energy. But yeah, I think I did not, when I was out in Sedona last year, I didn't experience anything. I didn't feel anything, but living in Charlottesville, being used to it, maybe I wasn't really that, but yeah, the Sedona's got some what they think is some pretty cool stuff out there too. And by the way, Jefferson, in my book, Thomas Jefferson wrote about red orbs that hovered over Monticello when he was president.
Wow. That's incredible. How do you think the police handled those sightings in Las Vegas?
Well, to be honest with you, I wasn't involved in that. George Knapp is like the TV, news person down there.
Yeah.
And when I was talking to him the other night, he said that he thought that they were trying. They did a pretty good job. He said you could tell they were a little nervous and they weren't screwing around, but they really thought maybe something was happening, and they handled it pretty professionally. But I didn't really follow it that much. But according to him, he thought that they did a pretty good job, or at least they were trying to. And then there was another one in Texas where they did what they call a tabletop exercise. It's like a spoof, but you pretend like there's a crash and then respond to it and all that. And they put a video out, and you know, I told George afterwards, I wish they would have read. If I'm going to send them my book, if they read my book, they probably do a better job of laying it out like it really happens. But we'll see. That's kind of cocky on my part, but I'd do it if I could find out who's running that. I'd probably send them one of my books for fun.
Last question for you is, and along this line of Las Vegas, you're standing on the Strip, and there's several stores along with yours that have books similar to your books. What do you say to get people to read and buy your book?
Most of the time when people come and read my book, they're usually asking me questions, or a lot of times people start telling me about something that happened to them. You know, what I do is, like, if I go to a conference or something like that, people will buy my books. And by the way, that website up there over my head there, if you go to that website, there's links to buy all my books and other information on there too. But Lang Publication, that's my business. I basically publish books for, you know, people that want to self-publish. So somebody will send us a manuscript in a Word document. We'll turn it into a book, put it on Amazon and that kind of thing, get it printed for them, whatever they want.
Cool.
But I've used that obviously to do my own books, but mine are on there, and there's links at langpublication.com. You can find the links, and you know, if they want to get the books, they're available in Kindle, hardback, and paperback. And we're gonna start doing the talking books, you know, and you can do them through Amazon. They'll be on there too. I'm gonna work on one. I've got another one that one of the books I'm doing is I'm going to revise the investigation book and put more paranormal stuff in it, particularly I might give you a call about that, because I'm still trying to figure out the equipment list that we want to use. We bought some, and you know, there's some interesting things out there that people use, and there's a couple of companies that make that stuff. And yeah, sometime we'll talk offline. I'd love to pick your brain about that. Yeah, because you guys do a lot more of that stuff than I do.
I'm available anytime. Absolutely.
Yeah, I will.
That'd be great.
And then the last book that I'm writing is because people always say, well, none of your books have very much case. You know, we would like to hear about cases. So what I'm doing is I'm writing a book. It's like 25 chapters. They're short stories about what happened to someone. And they're based on cases I've worked on in the last 30 years. And I've tried to pick out some of the most interesting and creepy ones that'll, but at the same time, trying to accurately convey what happened to the person. So the story would be it's not an investigative report, you know, where you got times, dates, locations, pictures, and all that. But what it is, it's like a story like you tell someone if you were sitting across the campfire or the dinner table. It's like, you know, last year I was driving home. You know what happened to me? And if that's that's how it's written. And I've got 3 or 4 chapters done, and I've read them to a few people. And everybody says, "Oh my God, I can't wait till the rest of this book comes out." You know, but it's interesting, but it's more entertainment. I've changed. I said I've redacted some of the names and changed the locations, so that people don't, you know, their privacy is critically important, and want to protect that. But, you know, that's what I'm doing now. Absolutely. And like I say, I'll give you a call. I want to talk about some of the equipment you guys are using too.
Sounds good to me. Rick,
all right.
Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. Again, I learned so much. That's why I let you go. I just thought I'm just going to let him go and talk about his stuff, because it's just so fascinating to me. And I think it's going to be fascinating to my listeners tonight too.
It's going to be what again?
It's going to be fascinating to my listeners tonight too.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I hope they enjoy it. And you know, if you get any interesting inquiries, you got my email and all that too. So.
Sure. I would love to have you on again at some point. Absolutely.
Yes, thanks. Well, we'll keep you up to date as this disclosure thing comes along. You know, I think that's happening fast, and there's a lot of what I understand is, okay, the Defense Authorization Act last year, they gave them amnesty. And this year, what they're trying to do is they put provisions in this year's, and it basically says that defense contractors have 6 months to disclose what they have in their facilities, wreckage, bodies, and all that. That is mandated by Congress that they have to come clean and disclose it. And they're also trying to get subpoena power. So if they don't disclose it, they can come after them. And then they put provisions in there to give them amnesty if somebody comes forward and tells them something that might have been done that's not legal or has, you know, tax consequences that they can't be prosecuted for it. And there's a fight right now in Congress to get, you know, there's some people that are like really interested in doing that. And then, you know, the guys that there's a couple of congressmen that are fighting, and then you look back and see where their you know, their money's all coming from defense contractors, you know, for obvious reasons. And that's, you know, they know it's true, but they're going to try to keep it quiet as long as they can. So we'll see.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on. I so appreciate it.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'll give you a call. Talk soon.
Okay.
Be safe.
Okay, talk soon.
Bye.
Have a great one. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
All right, it was fascinating. I love talking about that stuff. I love hearing about that stuff. And like I told him, my intention was to just let him talk about his book, and that's what happened, and that's what I wanted. Okay, tomorrow we'll be back at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Our usual, I'll be live tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. David Serrata is going to be with us, and he's going to be talking about UFO algorithms. So he'll be with us at 6:30 p.m. Pacific tomorrow. Anyway, I want to thank you all, and I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. This gentleman was fantastic. I'll give you his contact information, and he's got 3 books out, you know, which include this thing for the 911 people. And we'll call it a night. So here we go, and boom, push the right buttons. His website is langpublication.com. And the first book is UFO Investigation, Police, Fire, Rescue. And you've got the UFO Investigation, the Age of Disclosure, and you've got UFO Investigation, the Method for a New Age. And of course, you can get those through his website or Amazon. Alrighty. If you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. We are equal opportunity here. I'm just trying to get the word out about my show. And, you know, we're 220 away from hitting that 1,000 subscriber mark over on YouTube. So we're getting really close to that. And I'm about 500 away right now on TikTok from hitting that magic 3,000 mark. So we can start going live on TikTok with these shows while we're doing it live on the other networks. So it's getting there little by little. I'm hoping to have my YouTube set up by Christmas. Would be a nice Christmas gift. Anyway, I want to thank you all for coming, and I will see you tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, with David Serrata. Have a great rest of your day.